Hey there, Money Heroes. It's Stephanie, your host and fellow explorer on the Be Your Money Hero podcast. We're diving into the nitty-gritty of personal finance and having real conversations about how money, spirituality, psychology, and our life stories all dance together. This podcast is educational, but I'm not a therapist, and my guests and I cannot offer personalized advice through a podcast. My goal is to create a safe place for you to learn and get curious about yourself and expand the way you've thought about money. So if you're ready, let's dive in. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited. We have Jessica Rink, and she is a business intuition coach, and she helps high-powered executives and CEOs tap into their inner genius through their intuition, their instincts, and intelligence. Her background includes a 20-year corporate career, a master's in public administration, and a bachelor's in business, psychic and intuitive development, and personal resilience training. By the end of this episode, we hope that you will feel empowered to start getting curious about your intuition and how you can start leaning into your abilities. Start to tell the difference between intuition, logic, and emotion. And with these tools in your toolbox, you can really start to lean into your abilities. So welcome, Jessica. I'm really excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Steffi, for having me today.
So will you start us off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and what led you into the work that you do now?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Silicon Valley and had the benefit of seeing amazing entrepreneurial spirit birth out of that area with the rise of Silicon Valley. It was super exciting. And with that, I joined a corporate career to learn about the inner workings of business and leadership and how to create stable economies and really how do we participate with one another using good business. And so after spending a lot of time in that, I then discovered I had some pretty unique abilities, which at the time I thought they were unique. Now I know everybody has these abilities. And that's one of the big championing platforms that I want to tell everybody is we're all intuitive. But I learned that intuition can be a really useful tool, not only in helping us to navigate our own personal lives, but things that are important to us. And I believe that business and our careers, and if we own our own business or we work for a corporation, this is our self-expression. This is how we choose to show up in the world. And when we're in partnership with our intuition, it helps our self-expression grow and expand in ways that we might have not thought possible at the beginning. And so I just see the intuition as an inner mentor. And it is my passion to help other people realize that they have an inner mentor as well. So fast forward into today, I work with executives and CEOs and high-powered entrepreneurs to help them discover ways that their intuition is already speaking to them, ways that their energy can be optimized so that they release aspects of the grind and the struggle and the strife that tends to come with working really hard and trying to achieve our goals. And then also discover new potentiality that exists within them. And so it's a very complete aspect of being with people's minds and energies and intellect and intuition. And it's something I absolutely love. I live for it. And it is so much fun. Thanks so much for asking.
So I think that there might be different versions of what if people believe that intuition is. Mm-hmm. What do you define intuition as?
For me, simply inner knowing. It's a mechanism that the answers that you seek are not outside of you. They're internal. They're inside of you. So many people tend to outsource their intelligence and outsource their power and outsource, whatever it is that they're looking for to something being outside of them. But really, when we turn inwards, we have a whole universe within ourselves that is speaking to us and attempting to guide us in every moment. There are some people that would call intuition as your inner conscience. I grew up a huge Disney fan. Pinocchio is a wonderful movie. So fine, if we want to say that intuition is our Jiminy Cricket, I love it. Otherwise, some people consider it to be guided by a spirit or a spirit within them. Each of us has a spirit and a soul, and that aspect of ourselves can speak very loudly when permissioned.
So what does it mean when you talk about like tuning into intuition?
It is like tuning into a radio, and sometimes we get inundated with other signals. What I mean by that is our brains tend to be a very cluttered place. And with the rise of technology, with the rise of things like social media, constant feeds of information, television has, when you think of it this way, everything has a lot of channels to it. You can choose to tune into any channel. Intuition is a channel you can tune into as well. But so many people have so much clutter in their minds that there's multiple channels going on at once. Or for the computer metaphor, we've got a bunch of tabs running in the background and one of them's playing a song and we don't know which one that is. And so it's an aspect of choosing to tune into the channel that is represented by your intuition.
And I love that you say that, because sometimes like we do have so much internal clutter, and with all of these tabs open in our brain, it can be, it takes intentionality to figure out which tab it is, address it, so that we can then decide on if we want to keep that tab open, if we want to change it, if we want to just close it completely.
That's exactly right. And so many people have tabs open in the background that are linked with really big emotions like fear or frustration or anger or, any big emotion or energy that's running in the background. And from my perspective, there are a few things that block our intuition from coming in very clearly, and it is those big emotions. So we get really good at attempting not to feel the emotions and push them down and pretend like they're not there, which just makes those tabs in the background of the computer louder and louder and taking up more RAM and more memory and more space and more power from that computer, to use that metaphor. So when we address those emotions and choose to see them and feel them and release them, then intuition can come forward a lot more powerfully.
So while we're on that topic, how do we tell the difference between intuition or logic or emotion? How do we tell the difference between those?
Absolutely. Logic and reason are wonderful tools. Logic and reason explain to us what has happened. It helps us make sense of what we've experienced and is a wonderful tool. I liken that to our intellect. Intuition is that aspect of our minds that clues us into what could potentially happen, what might happen, or where we can go. It's sort of future forward leaning a little bit. And it also brings a lot of clarity to things that have uncertainty wrapped around it. Intuition is largely driven by the body. And so that's why it's so important that we become very comfortable living inside our bodies a little bit more than living inside of our brains. And our emotions also live in our bodies as well. So the importance of understanding how emotions are operating within a person will help them inevitably determine how their intuition is working alongside them as well. Again, the biggest blocker to intuition is fear. We're just simply an afraid peoples. Humans carry a lot of fear in their systems and on their nervous system. And so when somebody's attempting to tap into their intuition, the first thing that I would ask them to do is, what is your relationship with fear? And then next, what is your relationship with doubt? What is your relationship with frustration? Because each of those things, fear, doubt, and frustration, can be very occupied by the logic-based brain, turning that over and over and over again. Well, if it's mechanized by the logic part of our brain, it's not intuition. Overthinking tends to be another aspect that shuts intuition down. So in discerning all of these things, intuition is a feeling, a knowing, and it tends to come from our body. You hear people say all the time, gut instinct. Richard Branson, one of my favorite examples, he's the CEO of Virgin, and he says he will not close a business deal until his gut tells him it's okay. So that right there, that is intuition in action. How does the gut tell somebody what's going on? Well, it's implied that it's separate from the brain and separate from the intellectual or overthinking processes.
I know that in my own experiences, usually when my intuition tells me something, it is scary. And so I know that inner knowing that I have is probably correct because it scares the crap out of me.
Sure.
But sometimes it does and does not logically make sense, or our logic tries to work against us because we don't exactly know how, when, or why. Like, we don't know how we're going to get there.
Yeah.
And so that tuning into that inner knowing takes some practice. With some way that if we have a listener who maybe hasn't practiced too much and they want to start leaning into their intuition, what are some things that they can start to do to develop that?
Absolutely. So I've developed these mindset hacks, if you will. And they're these release statements that encourage intuition to come forward more clearly, strategically, by asking what blocks intuition to go ahead and leave, at least for that moment. So fear, as you said, tends to block, create a little bit of confusion in the process. We get an intuitive hit, our brain grabs a hold of it and goes, oh no, that seems scary. I can't do that. And then it just tends to spiral. And that is inherently why people tend to not listen to their intuition. Interestingly, psychology defines intuition as heuristics. And heuristics is the mind's ability to jump from one conclusion to the next without having to necessarily show its work. So that's an interesting take on how intuition would work. It's jumping to the next conclusion without having to show its work. If the mind attaches to that and says, oh, well, I have to reason why that's the conclusion, then the intuitive hit tends to die and we don't listen to it. But in dealing with things like fear, we use the power of our mind, the power of our intellect to ask the emotion or the energy to go. And that's simply by saying, I easily release all fear. And when we say those words, the nervous system takes its cue from the brain and goes, oh, we're not doing fear right now? Okay. And lets it go. And what's so brilliant about that is that in that moment, you get a little bit of a pause from the channels that are constantly turning. You get a pause from all the chaos that exists in the mind potentially. And then all of a sudden that intuition has a platform to speak a little bit more clearly. And that's really what we're talking about here, is just giving our intuition permission and a platform to speak. So for anybody who struggles with fear or anxiety or second guessing or doubt or any of those things, I easily release all fear. Pause. What does my intuition want to say to me now? And then pause a little bit more. Something will come forward. It may appear as a flash. It may appear as some people get a vision, if you will. Some people's minds see in pictures, other people's minds see in words. So it just depends on how your brain works. But when you give yourself that pause and you're not carrying an energy of fear or overthinking in your mind, all of a sudden you're more connected internally and can make some pretty bold leaps in your life.
I would also add to that it's, would you agree that we have to stay in this place of non-judgment and self-love? Because I know that for myself, all of that internal head trash, I get judgmental of myself for even having it. And instead, we have to recognize that it's there. Our brains are wired to protect us. So all of these narratives that we have are actually there because they're trying to keep us safe. But they're not actually keeping us safe anymore. They're holding us back. And so if we can take a deep breath, recognize those fears and doubts, tell them, I've got this. Thank you for trying to keep me safe, but I've got this. And then just taking a deep breath and letting yourself remain in that place of love for yourself and others, and also a place of non-judgment. Would you agree that that helps intuition come through just a little bit more clearly and uninterrupted?
Hugely. And when people start to recognize the power of those words, of releasing things that aren't working for them, I easily release, you can move on to things like judgment. we carry a lot of judgment around about ourselves, about other people, about how the world works, about how we think we should be doing, how we think they should be doing. And so releasing judgment is another aspect to give yourself a lot more room in your brain to interpret your own intuition. So that's huge because you wouldn't be thinking self-judgmental thoughts anymore. It takes practice. Now, in terms of neurocognition and neuroscience, it takes about 400 repetitions to create a new neural pathway. We can't really fix or rewire old neural pathways. Those exist, and we want them to exist because our brains exist on a scaffolding. We build upon itself. Knowledge builds, intuition builds. These are just habits of the mind. And so when we're trying to create a new neural pathway, just understand it takes repetition, it takes practice, it takes intention. Interestingly, though, it only takes 20 rounds of repetition to create a new neural pathway if you're in a stance of joy, love, and non-judgment. So if you can get yourself into a space of like, I love reprogramming my brain, and you're happy and elated about it, it's only about 20 repetitions. 400 if you want to grind through it, that's okay. Or maybe a combination there in between. But if we can experience this with a sense of curiosity and wonder, it goes a long way in reprogramming and remapping our own minds.
Are there other exercises that we could do to help change that subconscious rewiring, such as journaling, practicing gratitude, whether it's through artistry of your choosing? Are there other exercises that we can do to help tune into that love and the gratitude to help us reduce those amount of repetitions that we're required to go through to reprogram?
Absolutely. And what you're really tapping into with journaling and creative exercises is you're tapping into the right brain, which also comprises the components of our emotional range. So remember, we talked about intuition and emotion being fairly intrinsically linked to one another. And so when you're looking to get more in tune with your intuition, creative exercises go a long way. Interestingly, as I said, that intuition tends to be the inner mentor. It's also the muse. And so when we permission is huge. When we want to accomplish something, we got to give ourselves permission to actually become that thing. When we give ourselves permission to be creative, we're also inviting more of that intuitive ability forward. Artists know intuition very well. And artists know flow state really well. Have you ever heard somebody say, oh, I got lost in the music, or I got lost in the painting, and I just got lost in that expression? They're talking about a flow state. And again, we're talking about the power of the mind to exist on different realms of consciousness outside of that overthinking, outside of that fear, outside of that judgment, things that tend to pull us down and weigh us down. So yes, exactly right. That when you've got a commitment to the creative aspects of yourself, you're just straight lining a pathway to increased intuition and new neural activity.
So one of the questions I was very curious to get your perspective on is some people believe that things happen to us for a reason. And then there's other people that believe that when things happen to us, our brains are searching to assign meaning to that event that happened to us. So what are your thoughts on this? How do we, and a second part to that is, how do we shift our paradigm from victim to victor?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a complex question. Do things have intrinsic meaning, or did we create the meaning ourselves? And my goodness, that's an existential question to span the ages, I think. And I think that a lot of really smart people have been trying to figure this one out. So from my perspective, I think it's both. It's a yes and. I think that things inherently have meaning, but it is up to us to decide if that meaning is accurate for us in that moment. Perhaps it's meaning that will come about way later on down the line. I work with a lot of people who have been through catastrophes in their career. You get fired from a job and you've been working diligently at that job. And again, your self-expression, your identity gets wrapped up in that. And then you get fired. Whew, that does a number to somebody's brain and psyche and inevitably how they view themselves. To assign meaning to that, well, Did that have a meaning? Is the universe trying to tell me something? Maybe. But maybe that's not apparent to you at that time. Maybe it's not helpful to try and search for the meaning in that moment. Maybe it's time to triage and just figure out, what am I going to do next? What's my next best step? You talk to that person 10 months or 10 years down the line, and they might say something to you like, oh my God, getting fired from that job was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. So eventually the meaning showed up, and it showed up in a way that wove in with a greater narrative. So I think that, is it the search for meaning useful? I think it really can be, absolutely. But it is our personal responsibility to assign meaning to things that are actually helpful. If it helps you feel better about your situation and it gives you a sense of empowerment, I think that meaning is probably useful and should be well regarded. If it's a meaning that's assigned by somebody else that says, oh, everything happens for a reason and your dog just died, well, that meaning is not very helpful, is it? So
not much.
It really is up to the individual and where they need to align for their own development and journey.
So in doing my research, I listened to another podcast that you were on, and you had mentioned that personal development can reach a point that it becomes toxic. Would you expand on that for me?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about this one. So when we approach personal development from the mindset of, oh no, there's something inside me that's broken and needs to be fixed, what we're telling ourselves is not a very helpful narrative. Basically, I've seen people invest in the personal development realm to find something within themselves that's effectively defunct. That creates a mindset of a lack of power. Now, personal development, self-help are extremely useful tools for expansion and for growth and for experiencing and uncovering the brilliance that lies within us. But if we're constantly looking backwards in our chapters of life and like there's something else that needs to be fixed, I've seen it become obsessive. I've seen it become something where people become addicted to that victim mindset, as we talked about earlier, of there's something wrong with me, and they're in a perpetual state of I need to be fixed. I can't think of anything from my experience that slows people down more and keeps them stuck than that mindset of I need to be fixed. So approaching self-development and personal development from an expansive mindset of saying like, I know there's things inside me that I haven't discovered yet, and I can't wait to find them, then that is a very useful tool. And it's also a future forward-looking tool.
I know that through my journey, one of the things that has been so helpful for me is to just really get curious. So if I am triggered, if something bothers me, if I'm maybe angry or sad and I can't actually figure out why, to start questioning and start going deeper. And sometimes this can be a vulnerable place to be, even if it's just a self-discovery method. But are there other things that we could do, or what is the best way for us to realize maybe our own brilliance? So I'll rephrase it in a slightly different way. What is the best way for us to really start to discover our own brilliance and our own gifts if maybe we've grown up in situations or been in toxic relationships where we've been constantly put down and barraged for years? How do we rediscover our gifts?
Hold the potential in mind. There's something inside of me I haven't uncovered yet, and I'm so curious to know what it is. Then my biggest thing here with intuition is permission it to speak to you. There's so many people who are afraid of their own inner ability, of their own inner strength because of that trauma, because somebody was like, you're not worth anything and you're not going to amount to anything. And we internalize that damage and we internalize those wounds and we start speaking the same words back to ourselves in that critical inner voice. Challenge that voice. I guarantee you didn't put it in there, somebody else did. And so when you hear voices within that are not helpful, the channel keeps on changing and it just sounds loud and chaotic and nothing is useful to you, perhaps there's another voice that wants to speak to you, and that is the voice of your own intuition, your own inner knowing, and your own inner strength. So I personally believe that as everybody is intuitive, they also have an inner genius to them that only they can express, that we are all so uniquely created in this place, and that we can keep creating ourselves depending on how much we allow it, how much we permission it to happen. And it is a process. It does take time. It will not happen overnight. So set some standards for your participation here. But every day we can uncover just a new aspect of ourselves we might not have known. That does come from challenging our own assumptions. It does come from getting outside of our comfort zone, even if that's just by 1 degree every single day. But within that genius, there's so much to be expressed here. And what's super cool about where I think we're heading as a society is we're entering into this time of renaissance where there are so many tools available to us for us to discover ourselves. And one of my favorite quotes is, I think he was a Greek philosopher. Anyways, he said something like, become who you are by learning who you are. So for everybody that's seeking that potential within themselves, it's not just going to fall into your lap overnight. You're not going to wake up one day and say, oh gosh, I know who I am now. It's a process of discovery. It is a journey, and committing to the journey and permissioning yourself to participate is a huge aspect of that.
So what are some clues that can lead us to what those things are? Is it things that maybe we enjoy doing, that we lose track of time? Would you talk a little bit more about that?
Nailed it. Exactly. It's the things that interest us. It's the things that light us up. It's the things, I tell people info dumping is my love language. And info dumping, where I super nerd out, is on the topic of intuition and energy and the potential in the human mind and human body. I could talk about this for days, obviously. So in that, what do you love to talk about? What do you love spending your resources on or investing your money on? What do you invest your time on? And these are all clues as to your great life's task, as Robert Greene calls it. If you want to read an amazing book on discovering who you are, no matter where you were born and into what circumstances, the book is called Mastery by Robert Greene. And he talks about the different masters of our society, like Da Vinci and Einstein and Faraday, Marie Curie, Temple Grandin, all these people with these remarkably different lives that all had a common thread of genius and mastery. And each one of them was tapped into their intuition as well. So our calling then is to figure out what our life's task is. What lights you up? What makes you unique from the people around you? You're going to do it differently than the person next to you. You're going to do your business differently, entrepreneurship differently, podcast differently, and you must, because it's your unique expression that gives vibrancy to this place. And so just get curious and have fun with it.
Do you think that sometimes people's gifts are maybe taken for granted because it's something that comes easily to them? They enjoy doing it, and they're like, well, that can't be my gift. Like, it's just me. That's just who I am. Like, it's not hard enough. Do you ever see that?
I do. And I say, congratulations. You've got a leg up. Most people, gifted people especially, who do tend to take that for granted, they stop there. And what a bummer. That mastery and inner genius and cultivating that through our intuition would continue to challenge us. So I would say to those folks, this is just who I am. It's no big deal. Yes, it is. You have the opportunity to really master something if you choose to invest in it and help it to grow. And interestingly, I'm a big proponent of exploring different avenues of what you're good at as well. So let's say you're really good at podcasting and you've got a really good handle on that and you want to explore it just a little bit further. And so you start studying different subjects that are adjacent to podcasting or even completely different than it. It's a subject that's out in total left field, but it still interests you a little bit. Who's to say that through your study, you don't combine what you've learned one day to create something new? So all of these specialists who just stay in their little field and don't explore beyond it, they're limiting themselves. And it's almost their responsibility to get curious about other things that interest them, because who knows, they could end up creating something that we've never seen before.
Yes. And I know. So part of my background was that there was so much perfection that was requested and nothing was ever quite good enough. And so I have gotten better at recognizing what my own strengths are and celebrating those. And one of the tools that I had used is strengths-based leadership. I can't remember who wrote it right off the top of my head, but I'll put a link down to it in the show notes along with the other book, Mastery. Is that a book that you have read?
So many times. I love it so much.
That was a tool where like they had an assessment that you could take. And of course, my top strength was learning. And so that was my initial reaction was like, really? That's my strength, is I like to learn. Yeah. But when I kind of like took that back, like, okay, like let's stay in a place of non-judgment and self-love. One of my other strengths was like connectedness. And I'm like, okay, so I like to learn and I can see the interconnectedness between things. These are things that feel very normal and common for me. And so I want to encourage anyone who might be listening, maybe they have some of those strengths that just come easily and naturally and is actually still valuable to yourself and to other people, because then you are uniquely positioned with your story, with your background, with the people that you know, with your strengths. You're uniquely positioned to help in a way that nobody else can. And so I want to offer encouragement to people out there that as you start to get curious about yourself, lean into it and celebrate who you are.
That's exactly right. And there's so many people out there that I think social media does a number on this. We peruse social media sites that would say, you know, this person's got 1 million followers and they're really good at learning. Learning is their thing. Well, there's already somebody out there doing it better than I could ever do it, so why try? I see that a lot, actually. There's already somebody out there. This society doesn't need my contribution. And again, to the previous point, yes, we do, because that person doesn't have your experiences. They don't have your viewpoint, your perspective on life. And the more curious you can be about things that are adjacent to your gift, the more unique your creation then becomes. Perhaps you like learning about sea creatures. And then you start talking about sea creatures, and the sea creatures takes you over to a study of how water works. And it doesn't matter. The infinite choices is truly endless on what you could bring to your own spark and life's calling. So that's it. I think you nailed it.
I'm really excited to see how our society is shifting, because I have just kind of sensed it for the last few years. And now I'm starting to see small pieces of that going into place and how it's going to change our society, I think, because we're already seeing it in, you know, I meet with clients, and some of my older clients, like they have this traditional dream of retirement. But for a lot of the millennial clients that I meet with, they actually don't really have an interest in retiring in the traditional sense because they love the work that they do. And so they don't ever see themselves not doing it. They just want to be able to have more freedom in how and when and for who they do it for. And so I'm really excited for that. And you had said in a previous interview, I'm going to quote you here. You said, quote, "I believe that over the next 10 years, we're going to see more millionaires made than ever, ushering in new economies and opportunities to flourish and thrive. Prosperity and abundance are our birthrights after all," end quote. Now, would you mind telling us a little bit more about why you see that coming?
Absolutely. You know, how many people are starting to recognize the benefit of having an abundance mindset? Of really starting to see that this place can be whatever you want it to be. And how many people are aligning to concepts of wealth? Hopefully they're aligning to the concepts of inner wealth, because that's truly what we create within us, then materializes external to us. And so when we feel very wealthy inside, we will inevitably become very wealthy outside. That's reality. And so in that, with so many people learning about their inner wealth and their wealth of contributions that they can give. I love doing my work and I can only see myself doing it forever. Then great. We're birthing really passionate people. And this world has the potential to become very fun. Now, does it all come down to money? No, but money sure is helpful. It's a wonderful tool that helps us expand and experience. And I love Jen Sincero, who says, you were a badass at making money. She says that money is simply a desire for more life. Wonderful. Let's all crave more life. Let's all crave more energy that we can wield freely. Because when people start to view themselves as their own little empire, their own little economy, and whatever their gross national product is, they create from it. They go and invest that money into their communities. They invest it in other people's businesses. We become economies in and of ourselves. And healthy household economies will inevitably spread to create healthy national economies too. So when I see that there's an unlimited capacity for millionaires in this country, let's do it. Let's put that money to work. Let's start investing in things that are important to us, and let's start changing the world from things that we deem really valid and important, like sea creatures or whatever.
Yes. Yes. And that's one of the shifts that I see, because people are more concerned about, we're careful maybe about what stores we go shop at, but we don't think about necessarily what we're clicking on. And it's like, the more digitalized our lives become, the more our subtleties matter. Yeah. And the more they create those bigger things. And so we're starting to become more aware, like, hey, if I click on that link, I'm going to be fed more of that. So maybe I need to be more careful about what links I'm clicking on. Do I really want to put more energy into that news story and be fed more of that type of information? And so it's exciting for me to see these shifts as they're coming through.
And you bring up a really important point also about intuition and that inner knowing, is that it's directly connected with discernment. Intuition helps feed or weed out the things that are not important and discerning the things that are. And we do that by aligning to what's important to our inner wealth and our inner experience internally. So also a really key component of intuition is the ability to discern what's right for you.
And not letting somebody else tell you.
That's exactly right.
Yes, that's another thing that I've been seeing is we need to start questioning, like, we are just bombarded from all sides about what we should be happy wearing, what we should be happy consuming, what we should be happy striving for, what success means, what abundance means, like all of these different things. But when we can start tuning into ourselves and our intuition, we might realize that we don't necessarily want to be a billionaire. We feel most authentic in maybe having a tiny house on 3 acres of land where we can homestead. And that just because something doesn't fit somebody else's vision doesn't mean that it can't be yours. Absolutely. And so just leaning into and getting curious about yourself in that place of non-judgment, both no judgment from yourself, but also not letting that outside judgment follow through and taint what your true self is.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
So I have a couple of questions that we close out with every podcast, but the first one is, where can people find you?
Oh, thank you. I'm found at newearthcoaching.com, and my name is Jessica Rink. I'm also on the social media platforms of Substack, LinkedIn, and Facebook under Intuition Mindset.
Perfect. And what does abundance mean to you?
The limitless ability to choose whatever is aligned with that person, whatever is aligned with me. Abundance to me is synonymous with freedom.
And what is some of the best advice you've ever received?
People will tell you exactly who they are. Let them.
Say more.
That, in people's energy and people's expressions, they're telling you exactly who they are. We tend to create a lot of narratives around people. And so it's an invitation to just simply let somebody tell you exactly who they are and believe them and believe what they're telling you. It saves a lot of drama and grief that way.
Yes, it does. And especially in intimate relationships, sometimes when those are just beginning, I know that I have done that. People will show you who they are, and love is blind, and you don't see the red flags necessarily.
That's it. Believe what people are telling you.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for being on. I'm really glad that you joined us.
Thank you so much. This was a blast.
As we wrap up this episode of Be Your Money Hero, remember that your financial journey is a path of self-discovery. If you have questions that you would like answered on the show, please submit them to info@beyourmoneyhero.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, share your thoughts and insights with our growing community. Subscribe for more empowering discussions. And always remember, you have the power to be your money hero. Until next time, keep growing, money heroes.